Here's a guy who came from basically nothing to conquer almost everything. I mean, he was a figure so monumental that even 2 centuries after his death, we still can't really agree on who he was. Today, we're diving into the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who totally reshaped a continent and whose shadow, you could say, still looms over our world. So, what's the deal with Napoleon? Was he this brilliant visionary who dragged Europe kicking and screaming into the modern age? Or was he a power-mad tyrant who just sacrificed millions for his own glory? That's really the core question we're going to unpack today. You know, to understand the man, you've got to understand the moment he stepped into. The French Revolution had just, well, devoured itself, leaving this massive power vacuum filled with chaos and fear. As one historian put it, it was a maelstrom, and right out of that storm walks Napoleon. So how does a man from a, let's be honest, minor noble family on a tiny island become the master of Europe? Well, the story really begins with him feeling like a total outsider. Okay, get this. He wasn't even technically French when he was born. He was Corsican. He gets sent off to military school in France, and from day one, he's the odd one out. But man, did he have a brilliant mind, especially for stuff like math and geometry, which made him a natural when it came to artillery. His mother told him that to master the world, he first had to master himself, and that's a lesson he definitely took to heart. His rise through the ranks wasn't just fast, it was absolutely breathtaking. It was just a masterclass in combining raw military talent with some seriously ruthless political ambition. I mean, just look at this timeline. In 1793, he's a junior officer. Just 2 years later, he saves the entire government with a now famous whiff of grape shot, basically firing cannons into a mob. By 1799, boom, he's first consul, the most powerful man in France. And 5 years after that, he crowns himself emperor. It's an almost unbelievable climb to absolute power. And nothing, I mean nothing, symbolizes his ambition more than his coronation. For 1,000 years, emperors have been crowned by the Pope, but Napoleon, in this stunning break with tradition, takes the crown right out of the Pope's hands and puts it on his own head. The message couldn't have been clearer. His power came from himself and nobody else. So once he got that absolute power, what did he actually do with it? Well, this is where you really see the two sides of his reign. He was a modernizing reformer and a relentless conqueror, all at the same time. So here you see the two faces of his rule. On one hand, you've got the reformer. He gave France the Napoleonic Code, a revolutionary legal system that's still the basis of law in countries all over the world today. He created the Legion of Honor, which rewarded merit, not just your family name. But on the other hand, you've got the conqueror. His empire was built on constant, brutal warfare, enforced by a ruthless secret police and held together by something called the Continental System, which was basically an economic blockade meant to cripple his biggest rival, Great Britain. The year 1805 captures this contradiction perfectly. At Austerlitz, he pulls off his greatest military victory, just crushing the Austrian and Russian armies and making himself the undisputed master of continental Europe. But just weeks before that, at the Battle of Trafalgar, his navy was completely annihilated by the British. He could conquer the land, sure, but he could never conquer the sea. And it's a classic case of tragic irony, right? The very things that shot him to the top, his insane ambition, his absolute belief in himself, were the exact same things that would lead to his catastrophic downfall. You could start to see the cracks in his empire forming. The war in Spain became this bloody, draining disaster that he himself called the Spanish ulcer. His long string of victories bred this dangerous arrogance. He started to believe he was just unbeatable. And that belief led him to make the single biggest mistake of his entire life: invading Russia. So in 1812, he gathered the largest European army the world had ever seen. We're talking over 500,000 men, the Grande Armée, marching with him into the vastness of Russia. And this is the number of soldiers who were still fit for duty when they finally staggered out. The Grande Armée was destroyed, not in one big battle, but by the endless Russian plains, by a scorched earth retreat, and by the brutal cold of what the soldiers called General Winter. It was an unimaginable catastrophe, and it really was the beginning of the end. After the Russian disaster, his enemies just pounced. A massive coalition of Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria defeated his exhausted armies. In 1814, they marched right into Paris, and Napoleon was forced to abdicate. His punishment? They exiled him to the tiny little Mediterranean island of Elba. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. In one of history's wildest comebacks, he escapes from Elba, lands in France, and rallies the entire nation behind him for one last gamble. This whole period, known as the 100 Days, ended on a muddy field in Belgium at the legendary Battle of Waterloo, where he was finally and totally defeated. So Napoleon the man was defeated, exiled to some remote rock in the Atlantic to die. But Napoleon the idea? Well, his impact on the world was really only just beginning.
You see, his armies didn't just conquer, they changed things. They carried the Napoleonic Code with them, tearing down old feudal laws and putting in principles of legal equality. In places like Germany and Italy, his actions accidentally sparked the very fires of nationalism that would eventually create new nations. And his way of waging war, mobilizing every single resource of the state, it created a terrifying new blueprint for the total wars of the future.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Was he a hero who dragged Europe out of feudalism and into the modern world? Or was he a villain whose ego caused the deaths of millions?
In the end, the debate just keeps going. Was he, as Churchill suggested, a figure you could compare to history's worst tyrants? Or was he, like the historian Andrew Roberts argues, the Enlightenment on horseback, a monster or a modernizer? Maybe the most enduring part of his legacy is that even now, we can't decide. The answer really just depends on which Napoleon you choose to see.